Hello and welcome to Making Media Now, the Filmmakers Collaborative podcast. I'm your host, Michael Azevedo. On this episode, we take a dive into Season 3 of the award-winning podcast series, The Big Dig. Season 3 is called Catching the Codfather, and joining me today are series host Ian Coss and the GBH managing producer of podcasts, Devin Maverick Robbins. Season 3 of the Big Dig podcast, Catching the Codfather, goes down to the docks. It's a place where food, work, nature, money, and politics all meet, where dreams are born, fortunes ruined, and where the watchful eye of the government is always present. The series traces the rise of Carlos Rafael and his escalating conflict with the government. Because to judge the crimes of the Codfather, you also have to judge the whole system that he chose to break. Here's the trailer.
Can you tell me about how you did ultimately get arrested?
This all started a few years back when I wanted to sell my business.
Carlos Rafael was once in the fishing business. He owned the biggest fish plant and the biggest fleet of boats in the most valuable fishing port in America, New Bedford, Massachusetts. And he had built it all himself. Around the docks, people called him the Codfather.
The name of the game is sharpen your knife.
For decades, Carlos seemed unstoppable, unbeatable, and no one was quite sure how he was able to keep it up.
Never has there been a ban this long.
Even as the fishing industry struggled all around him.
A dramatic 77% cut in the cod catch.
Carlos kept on growing. But underneath that juggernaut of a business, there was a secret.
Some agencies thought he was involved in human trafficking or smuggling. Some people thought it was drugs.
A secret that Carlos guarded very carefully.
Those are the boat names, yes.
Until he slipped up.
Hi. This is Eusebio.
How you doing?
That's the salesman.
How's it going?
That's where
I'm Bob. Sergey, hello. Hello.
I'll regret that for the rest of my life, that son of a bitch. They would have never got me. But hey, it's over.
Making Media Now is sponsored by Filmmakers Collaborative, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting media makers from across the creative spectrum. From providing fiscal sponsorship to presenting an array of informative and educational programs, Filmmakers Collaborative supports creatives at every step in their journey. To learn more, visit filmmakerscollab.org. And if you're enjoying this podcast, please do give it a like, a share, a follow. Now on to my conversation with Ian Coss and Devin Maverick Robbins. Ian Coss and Devin Maverick Robbins, welcome to Making Media Now.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks.
It's great to be speaking with you both, and we're here to talk about Season 3 of the podcast series, The Big Dig. Season 3 is titled Catching the Codfather, and that's a production of GBH News and PRX. So before we get into the fascinating story of Season 3 and the personalities involved in Season 3, I want to talk a little bit about podcasting in general for each of you. You are both highly experienced with extensive resumes and awards in the podcasting field. And, you know, it feels like because there are literally millions and millions of podcasts that there've always been podcasts, but it's a relatively new medium. So, Ian, maybe you could start us out and just give me a sense of your journey as far as storytelling in the podcast medium goes.
Yeah. So I've always been an audio person, sound person. I was a music major in college, but I think when I graduated college, podcasting was only sort of kind of a thing. My journey into audio storytelling began about 10 years ago, 2015. I was I was in grad school and somebody came to visit a class I was doing and do a little workshop on field recording. So like how to go out with a microphone and record stuff. And it was a music class. I was doing grad school in music. And I went out and I did this short interview. I edited it down into a 3-minute piece. And the person who was doing the workshop with us said, "Hey, this is all right. You could probably pitch this to a radio show." And she reached out to an editor at The World, which is a show at GBH.
Sure.
And it ran. This is the first thing I'd ever made. It ran on a nationally syndicated radio show, and that was basically the spark for me.
That was it. And from there, you've been involved in all three seasons of
Yes.
the Big Dig. And the Big Dig season one, which covered the Big Dig, which was the 16-year construction project, road construction, highway construction project that just essentially quite literally tore Boston in two.
And then put it back together again.
Put it back together again quite nicely. But, that's what an extra 9 years will do. It was 9 years late. And at one time, I don't know if it still holds this distinction, but at one time it was the most expensive public works project in the history of the U.S. But
I think California High Speed Rail has
that's right,
exactly.
And
that pedestal.
Right, that's true. I think you're right on that. But the podcast that you all produced went on to win a Peabody Award in 2023, and it was named by Time Magazine as one of the best podcasts of all time. So that's pretty amazing, and it's actually good right now that this is an audio only podcast because people wouldn't see me seething with jealousy over that distinction. But so, Devin, how about your experience and your journey in terms of what brought you to podcasting, and what do you think distinguishes it and provides particular opportunities as a storytelling device?
Let me add one note
Sure.
for the bragging rights of the Big Dig. It is still charting in the history Apple podcast charts.
That's fantastic. As it should.
Yep.
As it
Two
should.
and a half years later. Yep. Yeah. Super exciting. So public media has been my entire career. If we want to go in the Wayback Machine, I started as an intern at NPR when I was 21 years old on a show that you may or may not have heard of called Talk of the Nation.
Of course.
And two people were in my intern
Was
group.
that the Ray Suarez years?
Back in the Ray Suarez and then the Neil Conan and all the hosts that happened after that. Yeah. But two gentlemen were in my intern class. Maybe you've heard of them. One is named Guy Raz.
Of course.
And the other one is a guy, what is his name? Oh, Ari Shapiro. You heard of him?
Yeah, I know that name too.
Yeah. So that was our intern class. So
I have a quick Talk of the Nation story for you. One time I was
Yeah.
actually working at GBH, and the writer Richard Ford was a guest of Ray Suarez, and
Yep.
this was back when you literally called, and I called, and I
I
finally
answered those calls.
oh maybe you
As the
connected me
intern.
with Richard Ford. I was a huge Richard Ford fan, still am. Anyway, I got to ask him a question, and a friend of mine who was out in LA happened to be listening. She calls me up. She said, "Were you just on Talk of the Nation?" So back then, like these days, that's no biggie, right? But back then, it was a thing.
It was also the only nationally syndicated live call-in show that member stations could carry both hours. It was 2 hours back to back, and then Science Friday on Fridays.
Yes, right.
So I grew up in public media. I think that's pretty clear. And everything that I've learned about audio storytelling, I learned there. So kudos to NPR. The craft, the rigor, the patience, the narrative. Eventually, as happens in public media, my show at the time, maybe 11 years later, was canceled out of NPR West. And so I moved into commercial podcasting. And it really kind of showed me the foundation that public media training had. And I ended up, funny enough, training folks at some very large podcasting networks how we do things in public media. And I will say that back in the day, and I'm trying to remember what show it was. It might have been Marketplace, when I was at Marketplace, that podcasting was brand new.
Mm-hmm.
And we literally topped and tailed our radio show. So if it were Kai's show or it was the afternoon personal finance show, we would literally top and tail it and then blast it to maybe two platforms.
Yeah,
at a
and
time.
define those terms for folks. Top and tail it.
Top and tail just means it's if it's an hour-long radio show, we would extract the MP3 or the wave, and we would literally cut it at the top and cut it at the bottom. So it would be 50 some minutes, whatever that case may be.
Got it.
No
Yes.
editing.
Yep.
It was literally an NPR radio show put out for on demand.
Ian, when you're thinking about a season of The Big Dig, so season one is launched. It's hugely successful, and I would imagine that the listenership grows rather incrementally instead
Mhm.
of, all at once. Um, what was happening within GBH and PRX around saying we think we're onto something, either these particular types of stories or this method of telling stories that led to having a season two and three, and also the subject matter selection for seasons two and three.
Devin, you can probably add to this, but as I recall, we released the first season in September 27th, 2023.
Mhm.
And I think by October or November, I recall word coming down from on high. So what you got for story ideas?
Nice.
You want to do anything else? At that time, I was a freelancer. I was not on staff. So I was just casting about for whatever I was going to do next. And I said, and I had nothing. Like I had nothing in the hopper lined up. And I was like, give me 2 weeks and I'll come back with something. And very quickly that fall, I came back with two story ideas. And at the time, we were kind of debating between them. And one of them was about the state lottery and the birth of the scratch ticket. And one of them was about this fishing mogul known as the Codfather.
Okay.
And I actually thought that the Codfather was going to be season two. Um, if you've listened to the series at all, that interview that you hear in the very first moments of the series,
Yep.
I recorded that in 2023. That interview is 2.5 years old. Because I I started working on it right away. And then I was kind of having a hard time figuring out what the story was.
Hmm.
Like I knew I was really interested in Carlos Rafael, this guy, we'll maybe talk about it more, but the Codfather of New Bedford. But the larger story around it wasn't quite clicking for me. And so I had this other idea of, like I said, the state lottery, which felt clearer to me at that moment. So I said, why don't we run with that one?
Yeah.
So sometime in December, I want to say, of 2023, again, just a few months after the first season came out, we came back, we pitched that, we started developing it, and yeah, it basically hasn't let up since.
So let's get into season number three again. It's called Catching the Codfather, and it tells the story of not exclusively Carlos Rafael, but he's kind of the hub of the wheel. And I got to tell you, as a guy who's I am 50% Irish and 50% Portuguese, and
Mm.
my grandfather came from the Azores, and
No
and I
way.
know I have a lot of family down in the New Bedford Fall River area. So it was so interesting to hear the I'm saying here, but I was really feeling everything that you were building with your
Yeah.
soundscapes and your interviews in the podcast. So, you kind of right out of the gate, you succeeded on a sensory level. But how did the story of Carlos Rafael come to you, and why is he the Codfather?
Yeah. Well, I think actually what you're describing really speaks to part of my interest in the story and the way it fits in the larger project. Um, After we did that season one about this infrastructure project, I started thinking about this feed as a larger than any one story. And what I want to do is kind of build out a world that's based around Boston and New England in the time period of like the 80s, 90s, into the 2000s, in which every season looks at a different institution or a different facet of society. Um, but that over time, the pieces all start to link up a little
Sure.
bit.
Yeah.
So maybe a character from one season shows up in another season, or themes will kind of rub against each other. Um, and so part of my interest in the Codfather story is that it takes us into this very different world, this world of, a Portuguese American fishing hub south of Boston. It's not in Boston proper. For folks who are not familiar with the area, we're talking New Bedford. It's about an hour south down on the coast. This is the port where, that famously inspired the book Moby Dick, right? Um, And so part of my interest in the story was simply the world building aspect of wanting to expand the world that we were building, the tapestry of these different seasons. And so the way it came about is that I was casting about for story ideas. Like I said, looking for something outside of Boston, something that took us to a different place. And I was just started looking around different kind of smaller cities like Lowell and Lynn and New Bedford. And the Codfather story just, it kind of hits you right away.
Yeah.
When you see that name, and it was all over the news there for a time, especially in New Bedford. So it was just immediately intriguing. There are these details like the fact that there were these undercover IRS tapes, right? There was a sting operation involved. You read about his office and it was decorated with posters from the movie Scarface, right? So there are all these tantalizing details, enough for me to say, why don't I just reach out and see if I can find this guy?
And what was his initial receptivity to your inquiry?
He picked up the phone and he invited me down to talk, which was surprising to me. And I don't attribute it to any special journalistic skill on my part. I attribute it to dumb luck and good timing. That it's no spoiler to say that Carlos went to prison.
Right.
He is out of prison now. There was a lot of attention around his case about 10 years ago when the trial and everything happened. And at that time, I think he turned down a lot of requests of all kinds. He just did not want to bother with it. And so I think I had the good fortune of reaching him at a moment when he was not in prison and not facing any legal troubles and was a little more open to talk.
So I've listened to the 3 episodes. I believe there's only 3 out so far of season 3. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so I've listened to all 3, and and I've watched a bit of the YouTube companions to each of them. So when you're setting out, say on let's say season 3, what determines how many episodes there are going to be, and how do you say Devin and Ian work together to say, okay, well, are we stretching it if we make it 7 episodes? Is this really more of a 4-episode thing? And oh my God, you're really overloading me with visuals that I got to find to throw up on YouTube as you're making these arcane references to, fishing conditions off of George's Bank in 1978.
I'm laughing because we've had some knockdown, drag out fights about how many not between Devin and I, but
Yeah.
the number of episodes is I would always joke when we were working on the Big Dig that the podcast came to resemble the project.
Yeah.
That we thought it was going to take a year. It took a little longer. We thought it was going to be 8 episodes. It turned into 9. We thought it was going to cost this. It cost,
Yeah.
It was one of these stories that kind of kept, the more you chew on it, the bigger it gets.
Sure.
So there is an element of that, and it's hard to know. But Devin, maybe you can.
No, I'm laughing because I'm remembering all of our meetings about episode numbers. So we added episodes, Michael, to Big Dig. We added episodes to Scratch and Win.
Okay.
And I would say it mostly, so that was outside of our budget is what I'm getting at. So that's why there were the Zoom conversations about it. And it mostly came from Ian's reporting and archival digging and other sourcing where he would come back and say, I really think this needs breathing room. Sound designs, you've mentioned sound design before. Maybe we got access to archival we didn't get before. So we wanted to add that in to give it some breadth and color, story structure. With Codfather, we nailed it at 6 and it's stayed at 6.
It's stuck.
It's stuck. And I will say this, the number of episodes, as people listening probably will tell you, there is a benefit to the listener, as we know, right? They want more, they get hooked, as we've heard. But there's also a benefit for sponsorship opportunities.
Yes.
And so on top of that, more episodes also means bigger budget. So it's kind of this combination of where we're still trying to find our happy place.
Sure.
But personally, I will say the story comes first. And if we feel strongly about adding 2 more episodes, as we did with Big Dig and Scratch and Win, I will do my best to try to make that happen, because it's the listener experience and the story that Ian wants to tell that I'm the biggest supporter of.
Sure. Yeah, so let's just talk a little bit about that parallel production process between the audio only podcast and the YouTube companion. I could be wrong on this, but it would feel to me that the acquisition of the searching out and the acquiring of the images to accompany the audio might add some time to your entire process. Are you doing this in parallel, or were all 6 episodes kind of in the can and somebody on your team said, okay, now I have to make essentially a visual version of this?
Right. I mean, I think we're both laughing because it's like, you think we have this figured out?
Yeah, exactly. I will say
you can tell us anything. We'll believe it.
Yeah,
we're working on it. We're working on it.
We're working on it because we have exciting things in the works. More on that soon.
Okay.
But with Big Dig, I will say, honestly, the audio came first. And what was discovered in the production of the audio first series was the rich archives that live in the GBH library. And people got wind of it, and just bringing back to life also old news stories, from the time that was there, local news stories, documentaries from our brands, sourcing of other archival material. And the newsroom was like, in their brilliance, hey, let's see if we can pull together enough of the visuals, and we will run Ian's podcast underneath it. So we will match to the best of our ability. And that's where we started to find the holes where, we could have used some B-roll. We could have used Ian doing some interviews, but without having the video first on that season, it pulled together brilliantly, I think, because we're almost at 2 million views on YouTube, on the GBH News YouTube page. And so from there, I'll let Ian tell you about Scratch and Win and or the way that we transitioned into Codfather video.
So I'd say the workflow that we are developing and getting better at is basically, it's still an audio first project where I'm going out and recording most of the interviews myself with a handheld field kit. But we're trying to think about the visual component earlier on. So the anchor of it is the archival footage. That's what makes all this work. The fact that GBH is historically a television station first and foremost, and our local news archives is overwhelmingly visual. And so for every one of these series that we've done, we'll start with a big search of the GBH archives, and we'll pull hundreds of items that, we then kind of slot into the series. What we're doing now is, as I'm editing the audio script or the audio mix, I'm always including the video in that edit. We work in a program called Descript that many audio and video people will be familiar with. It's this very handy integrated audio, video, and text editor that transcribes everything and allows you to edit in a text interface, just like a Google Doc.
Yeah.
So what we're doing is we're uploading all the video into that, not just stripping out the audio, but keeping the video attached so that I can build a whole script for it, a 50-minute episode, and it's got the archival in there. I can pull that out into my mixing session, if I'm working in Pro Tools or Logic or whatever it is. But then our video editor can pull that same project out into Premiere or whatever they're working in. And they've already got this nice layup of all the visual archival material, which again is kind of the backbone.
Yeah. Yeah.
From there, they can then fill it in with other B-roll, which could be some of it we've shot present day. You'll see that in the Codfather series, but largely archival.
Archival stills as well.
Yeah, archival stills as well.
Yeah. And what are your numbers telling you? How are the series being consumed, audio versus video, or a podcast platform versus YouTube, which is now a podcast platform, of course, but I think you know what I'm asking.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'd have to check, but I think it's pretty evenly split at this point between RSS and YouTube.
And I'll say for Big Dig, it was platform first.
Yeah.
Apple is our biggest driver of downloads. We got a lot of love from that platform, meaning in features. And then the video, so I would say it's double. The platform is double downloads on the platforms for Big Dig than it is on the video. It was more evenly distributed in the couple millions for Scratch and Win. And this time around, in fact, I had a conversation this morning about this. People have been finding us on YouTube first.
Mm-hmm.
But we are just now featured on Apple in their carousel on the homepage of the app. And when that happened for Big Dig and for Scratch and Win, we just saw, our numbers skyrocket. And so the conversation this morning with folks was like, wow, this is an interesting change in that they know GBH News, they know that YouTube page, maybe they're subscribers, maybe they're not, maybe they're fishing enthusiasts, whatever. But episode 1, I want to say, I think there's maybe close to 100,000 between the 3 episodes right now, with episode 1 being about 70,000.
Wow. Well, from a branding standpoint, I think you guys, it was fortuitous that, season 1 was the big dig, but then you can hang on to the big dig because season 2 and season 3, you're taking a big dig into these stories. So,
you will never hear me say that out loud on the podcast, but yes, the play on words is there.
Yeah, it's definitely become a repeatable narrative engine for GBH
Yes, exactly.
News.
Three cheers for metaphors. But speaking of digging, let's dig in a little bit to the Codfather. And
you don't use a fishing metaphor? Come on.
Well, I might cast that net a little bit longer. See what I can reel in.
All right.
Okay, I'll stop. So Rafael, Carlos Rafael. So what gets him in trouble? He's the Codfather. Who doesn't love the Codfather?
The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration.
Okay. Let's talk about their clash. So it was a facetious question a bit, but your story is, it's almost like these archetypes, and Carlos is an archetype, and you pair him, at least in the first 3 episodes of this season, with another archetype, a guy named John Bullard. And it's not immediately clear that they're on a collision course necessarily, but they kind of are. And so talk about how, these guys do seem like archetypes at cross purposes.
I definitely have a soft spot for these almost like Greek tragedy kinds of stories. And that's part of what really drew me to the story of The Big Dig, is you have these kind of larger than life figures. And when I told you earlier that it took a little while for the Codfather story to kind of click in my mind. And part of it clicking was getting to know John Bullard. Because like in any great myth, the hero or anti-hero has some kind of foil. Sure. And John and Carlos are a really fascinating pair. 2 things I'll say about them. One is that they really encapsulate the like ethnic politics of Massachusetts. John Bullard is the 12th John Bullard in a line, all of whom went to Harvard University. Right. He is old Yankee New England stock. Okay, Carlos Rafael is a immigrant from the Azores in Portugal who got off the boat and wanted to start his own business. Sure. He is the scrappy newcomer underdog. And so that right there, so much of New England can be understood through the lens of, the old Protestants and the newcomer Catholics, right?
Sure. And then being joined by that mercantilism.
Exactly right. Yeah, I didn't mention this, but the Bullard family was involved in the whaling industry back in the 1700s. So truly like built an empire out of the sea in that town. And now Carlos Rafael is trying to do the same thing, right? So there's that layer of it. Then there's the layer of Carlos is somebody who doesn't like rules.
Yeah.
And he came to the US because he was trying to avoid getting drafted into the Portuguese army and sent to fight in a colonial war in Angola.
Mhm.
That is what sets him in motion on this journey, right? So he came here trying to get away from government control,
Yep.
right? To do his own thing. He went down to the waterfront because he was too young to get a job in the textile factories, right? Nobody cared how old he was down at the waterfront. That's what drew him there. And John Bullard is somebody who is, he worked in the city. He was mayor of his hometown. He worked in government regulation. This is somebody who values process, who values science, right? Who believes in the power of government to be a force for good in people's lives, right? And so these two figures are just so polar opposites. And as you pointed out, they are very much on a collision course.
Yeah, and I was wondering as I was listening to the podcast, and then in the background, you were just bringing me up to speed on. I do wonder, and maybe you know this, if someone down there in the original Bullards building that whaling empire, were they a rule breaker? Were they looking for that, competitive advantage that would have put them perhaps on the other side of the ethical fence?
Well, I'll tell you what, they certainly weren't concerned about conserving the
Yes.
the whales and
Yeah.
nature. And
Yeah.
this is something Carlos pointed out to me. Sometimes you go into interviews like this with, I have this big highfalutin like theoretical concept of how all these characters relate, and then it just comes out. And Carlos in one of our interviews said, like they killed all the whales.
Right.
They could hunt all the whales to the
Yep.
end of the ocean, and I can't catch a codfish. Like
Right.
they made their millions,
Yes.
and now I want to make my fortune. And suddenly, we have to protect the oceans. And it was one of those moments where I was like, oh, okay. I guess I don't need to say that. He just said it for me.
Yeah. And it doesn't
Because it's very real for them. Yeah, for Carlos in particular.
It doesn't feel as if Carlos, there's not a sort of a poetic drive that, he is a man of the sea and he will always
Oh
give
no, he's a crass businessman.
Exactly, right. And it just happened to be fish.
He's not out in like a
that's the
rain slicker on
commodity.
the boat. He's in the office on the phone,
Yeah.
working the phones. That is Carlos.
So one of the many things that the podcast is so effective at is you introduce all of these these topics that just are evergreen in terms of being points of conflict. So, you've got the who's making the rules, who's benefiting from the rules. You've got unions versus the fish owners and the suppliers. And then you've got the introduction of environmentalism. And, on one day, the environmentalist is the friend of the fisherman, and then a few years down the line, they're the sworn enemy of the fisherman. When you were thinking about putting the story together and knowing that you were going to touch upon all of these, how were you thinking about introducing these tensions in a new way that served the vocabulary of the story you were telling?
Yeah. There's a few. These series, obviously, they tell a larger story, but I do try and give each episode a coherence and have each episode tell a contained story. I think we did this very strongly in the lottery series. Like we have one episode that's all about like property taxes and state finances and how we need the lottery to pay for schools and stuff. And so I was thinking about this with the Codfather series too, where I wanted each episode to kind of pull at a different thread. The other thing I'll just put out there that maybe speaks to how I think about these stories is I really don't like preaching to the choir. And I really don't like coming out with just comfortable stories that reinforce people's predispositions. And so part of my interest in the Carlos Rafael story is that it takes groups of people who I think we all want to relate with. Like we all want to support independent fishermen, right?
Yeah.
But we also, I'll speak for myself. I want to support the government scientist who's out there trying to count how many fish are in the sea. I want to support the environmental law firm that's trying to protect the oceans. And I think probably maybe I'm projecting a little bit, but I think a lot of our listeners do too.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to offer a story that challenges me
Yep.
and hopefully challenges some of our listeners to, to, grapple with their own instincts and ideology.
Yeah, and I think that what it forces is coming to the conclusion that this isn't all like, white hats and black hats.
Right.
It's shades of gray.
Yeah.
And I can't remember if it's episode 2 or 3, but there's this, I never had thought about it, but there's this kind of great analogy that somebody makes to the fishermen kind of being the cowboys
Yes.
of the East Coast, the cowboys of the ocean, and that kind of rugged individualist, don't fence me in mentality.
Yeah. The West has its cowboys and the East has its fishermen.
Yeah, exactly. And that again, that tension between, the classic American story of the trailblazer versus,
Right.
okay, you've blazed too many trails, now we need to rein you in.
Yeah, and I appreciate what you said about heroes and villains. Because as much as I like archetypes, I don't like stories with clear good guys and bad guys.
Yeah.
And that is something that it's funny. We didn't plan it, right? We did the Big Dig, the story about that infrastructure project, as a one-off.
Mm-hmm.
It was not meant to be a template or a launching pad for a bigger series, which it has become. But I do, when I look back on that first season and that story, there are these aspects of it that then I think got baked into the way we tell all stories on this feed.
Yep.
And one of them is that fact that, you can go and tell the story of the Big Dig in a good guy, bad guy kind of way. Like, oh, they had this great plan and then this greedy contractor came in and mucked it up, right? Or,
Sure.
This guy really had it together and that person screwed up. And I really came away from that story feeling like, no, that's not what happened at all. There are failures for sure, but they're collective failures. They're systemic failures, and they're so much more interesting than one greedy contractor. And so that's the way I look at the Codfather story too.
So along those lines, with all 3 seasons, you're telling stories that are particularly resonant in a particular region, the greater Boston area, or even the Massachusetts area now. But how are you making sure that the stories and the conflict at play resonate outside of a particular region? And the numbers would seem to indicate that you're being successful in that.
Devin can speak to that. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say my Cliff Notes answer to that is who drives on a road?
Yeah,
that's about as relatable, right? Who
Yeah.
has traffic on their way to work every morning or picking the kids up, right? And I'll let Ian talk about how a project that he's working on that really makes it the resonating of that story, particularly a national conversation. But originally, when Ian came to me in 2022 with his pitch and his concept for the Big Dig, of which, like he mentioned, he was an independent, he was working at another company. And at the time, it took some convincing. It was maybe a good 9 months, Ian, that we were in pitch meetings and budget meetings and how are we going to pay for this? And is anyone really going to care outside of Boston? That was always the question.
Yeah.
But the goal was to create a very first GBH News original. And that's what we call these. Ian's feed is the first of the GBH News originals. And they had never done this before. And we wanted to utilize, and so everything we've already talked about. And so the goal with the storytelling was to start in Boston, New England, in Massachusetts area with a story that resonated here. And then through his craft and his brilliance, he expands that out. And so you feel connected to it, even if you didn't think you were connected to it, right?
Sure. Yeah.
The same we did for Scratch and Win. And it was this idea of Massachusetts being the largest spender on lottery. Like that, people are like, whoa, that's a headline that you would see somewhere in the New York Times. It's a local story, but almost leading with that when we go and pitch the media for interviews, right? Or leading with that idea that this is not just a local story. Starts at a local story, and there's nothing wrong with it being a local story. But we know you want to hear it on the West Coast,
Right.
or
Yeah.
we know you're going to love it up in Alaska. And that's kind of what we've made sure to do as we continue to look at the stories that Ian wants to cover and whether or not they'll resonate with an audience outside of
Yeah.
a local market.
Yeah, I think there was a time when I looked at the localness as maybe a limitation, that over time the feed might start to feel a little provincial. But actually, the more of these we do, the more I feel like it is a strength. Um, One of the analogs I think about a lot is the show The Wire, which I think is just a beautiful piece of television. I've never lived in Baltimore. I don't know, like I have no personal connection to that place, but the deeper you get into that show, the richness of the world, and that's why I keep mentioning this idea of world building.
Yeah.
That there is this larger whole that you start to care about the place and the characters the deeper you get into it. Um, and so,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
I love
basic.
I love that we've pigeonholed ourselves into telling nerdy stories about Boston politics in the 80s and 90s. It's small, but it's rich at
And
the
I'll
same
say one
time.
last thing, Michael, is that
Sure.
it is coming from from an outside looking in perspective, it has done tremendous wonders for GBH's brand, and all of our branded content, and for elevating us outside of the local area. So we're working with algorithms within the platforms that are now recognizing content. We are getting millions of visitors to our YouTube pages, right? And I mean all brands.
Yes.
And so this series that started off with just that one season, we weren't really sure if we were going to be able to do any more. Has really turned into a franchise, for lack of a better word. And has allowed us to grow every brand with a GBH logo.
Yeah, well, I can't tell you how great it is to be telling a happy story about some of these successes coming out of public media, because I think that, given the events of the last year or so in the second Trump administration and cutbacks, I think the default thinking is, oh, public media RIP, and that is not necessarily the case. Tell me about your release cadence. How frequently are you dropping the episodes? And as I said, episodes 1 to 3 are available now. What's the rollout for 4, 5, and 6?
So it'll keep coming out weekly. We are still figuring out, this started really as a seasonal show. We would release something when we had it. Looking ahead, we're trying to be a little bit more regular. We want to be engaging with our audience besides just 6 to 8 episodes a year.
Okay.
And so we're going to be doing a series of live events this spring that's actually building on the original Big Dig highway story. It's called the Highway Teardown Tour. I'm visiting other American cities that are struggling to figure out what to do with their own downtown highways, and taping live conversations in those places.
Oh, very cool.
That's going to be coming out in the feed this spring, or really more summer, like May, June. And then we're going to be returning in the fall with another documentary season that we are already working on. So we're doing our best to keep the feed a little bit more active and regular, but at the same time, this is not a light lift, quick turnaround kind of show.
No,
Right.
yeah,
The
and that's to your
time
credit.
and attention is important to what we do.
I do want to mention one more thing, Michael,
Sure, yeah.
on a related note to that maybe sets us aside. I can't speak for every public media station, of course, but I will give public media its kudos here. And so basically, the way that we see not just Ian's series, but a lot of the podcasts that we've done over the maybe past 5 years is we look at it as a multi-platform distribution model, right? So in addition to releasing audio first on platforms, we're now integrating visual aspects to every new piece of content that we're creating on the audio side. Then we are also distributing it on broadcast. And so that may make us different in that this started with Big Dig. And so we reformatted every podcast episode and it aired on 89.7. In addition to being available to the 400 plus member stations around the country via PRX Exchange, we were giving them 9 hours of free content, a free, amazing content, right?
Yeah.
So we did that for Big Dig, and it was a great success. We did it with Scratch and Win, and starting in April, you will be able to hear Codfather, catching the Codfather on maybe your member station. You got to ask them.
That's such a win-win-win for the consumer of this type of content because, they're pretty much platform agnostic. Like if there's a compelling story, if you just tell me where to go to find it and it's found.
Well, and you also have to remember, and this is not a dig at our wonderful public media supporters, but they're of a certain demographic and a certain age where they are maybe less experienced in finding that content, and they are that pure radio listener. Right. And so we've found that not just with Big Dig, Scratch and Win, and Codfather, but we did it with a series called What Is Owed, a podcast series out of GBH News as well 2 years ago. And so it gives us this consolidated content discovery platform, right? So it also allows for bulk sponsorship opportunities, right? And we're seeing it being a success. And so we're going to be hopefully trying it with most of our other branded pieces of content.
All 3 seasons are available, the entirety of season 1, which is The Big Dig, and season 2 is, what's the title of season 2 again?
Scratch and Win.
Scratch and Win, yes, okay. And season 3 is Catching the Codfather.
It sounds like someone needs to listen to season 2, Michael.
Someone does. And someone would be me. And so I've been talking with the producer and the host, Ian Coss, and I've been talking with the producer, Devin Maverick Robbins. I thank you both for your time. I've enjoyed the chat and really enjoyed this podcast.
Thanks for doing
Michael.
it.
Fisherman